The Art of War by Sun Tzu was written more than 2,000 years ago and is still, to this day, one of the most studied books by top founders, world leaders, and elite athletes. In today's video, we'll explore what actually separates those who win from everyone else. Even though it was written for war commanders, its lessons apply to your life, like managing a marriage, a friendship, a rivalry with a sibling, a difficult boss, or your own fear. The Art of War is 13 chapters long. On the surface, they can feel like 13 separate topics. But read together, a clear progression emerges in 3 phases, from how you prepare to how you move to how you see. And each phase depends on the one before it. So we start where Sun Tzu starts, long before the first move is ever made. Phase 1. Before you ever act. Most people rush to start, they act first and think later. Sun Tzu does the opposite. The first 3 chapters are about setting yourself up to win before the fight even starts, planning it out, and making sure that when you do win, it costs you as little as possible. Chapter 1. Prepare before you act. Picture 2 people starting the same business on the same street, on the same day, with the same amount of money. One of them spends the first month writing out every cost, every risk, every competitor, every possible way the thing could fail. The other one just starts because, to him, starting feels productive while planning just feels like waiting. A year later, only one of them is still open. Sun Tzu begins his entire book with a warning about exactly this. He says war is a matter of life and death for a nation, and because of that, it deserves serious study. Now, you're not commanding an army, but the principle still holds. Whatever you're actually fighting for, a custody arrangement, a friendship that's gone quiet, a promotion, your own health, deserves the same seriousness. The people who treat it casually are the ones who lose it. So how do you actually study a conflict before you're in it? Sun Tzu gives you 5 things to measure. The first is what he calls the moral law. It's the bond between a leader and the people who follow them. It comes down to one simple test. Would the people around you still show up if there was nothing in it for them? Do they believe in what you're building, or are they just collecting a paycheck until something better comes along? In 1915, Ernest Shackleton's ship Endurance got crushed in Antarctic ice. He had no ship, no radio, and no real hope of rescue. What he had was a crew that trusted him completely because he had spent years treating them like they mattered. When he told them they were going to survive, they believed him. And that belief is the reason all 28 of them actually did. A team that trusts its leader will follow them through conditions that should be impossible to survive. A team that doesn't will quit the moment things get merely difficult. The second factor is heaven. Sun Tzu describes it as timing, weather, the seasons, the conditions you don't control but still have to plan around. In 1944, right before D-Day, Dwight Eisenhower had a decision to make. The invasion of Normandy needed a very specific combination of tide and moonlight, and the weather forecast for the original date was terrible. Eisenhower made the call to delay by 24 hours, gambling on a narrow break in the storm that his meteorologist promised was coming. That window held just long enough. Timing isn't a minor detail you adjust for. Sometimes it's the entire difference between a plan that works and one that gets people killed. The third factor is Earth. It's the actual terrain you're operating on. At Thermopylae in 480 BC, a small force of Greek soldiers held off a Persian army many times their size, not because they were stronger, but because they chose a narrow mountain pass where numbers stopped mattering. The ground itself became their advantage. And this isn't just an ancient idea. Think about a quiet, introverted person who feels completely outmatched at a large networking event, but comes alive in a conversation with one person over coffee. They haven't become more confident overnight. They've just stopped fighting on ground built for extroverts and moved the contest to terrain where their actual strengths apply. Whatever field you're operating in, your market, your industry, your specific situation, ask yourself where the ground already favors you. Where can you compete on terms that neutralize someone bigger than you? The fourth factor is the commander. Here, Sun Tzu lists 5 qualities: wisdom, sincerity, benevolence, courage, and strictness. Notice that benevolence and strictness sit right next to each other on that list. A leader who is only kind gets walked over. A leader who is only harsh gets abandoned the moment people find an exit. The ones who last hold both at once. You see this in any parent or coach who's earned a kid's genuine respect. They show up for the small stuff. They remember what actually matters to the person in front of them. And that same person will also not let them play, keep them home for the weekend, or simply say no and not give in just because it gets uncomfortable. The people who stay loyal to someone like that aren't loyal despite the strictness. They're loyal because of it, because it proves the warmth was never just for show. The fifth factor is method and discipline, the actual systems that keep things running, how people are organized, how supplies move, how money is spent. Think about the difference between someone who relies on motivation to exercise and someone who simply built it into their morning. Gym clothes laid out the night before, same time slot every single day, no decision left to make in the moment. The first person has good days and bad days. The second person barely notices whether they feel like it because the system was never depending on how they felt. Discipline isn't glamorous, but it's the thing still working long after motivation runs out. Once you've measured these 5 factors, not just for yourself, but for whoever you're up against, Sun Tzu gives you the next step. Compare the two sides directly, point by point. Which side has the deeper trust between leader and people? Which side has the more capable leadership? Which side holds the better ground and the better timing? Which side enforces its standards more consistently? Which side rewards and punishes in a way people can actually predict? Which side has trained harder? Which side is simply stronger? Run through that list honestly about your own situation, and you can usually tell who wins before anything even happens. But Sun Tzu is careful not to turn this into a rigid formula. A plan is only useful as long as it adapts to the situation in front of you. The moment circumstances shift, your plan has to shift with them, even if that means abandoning something you were sure about an hour ago. This is the part most people get wrong. They mistake stubbornness for commitment. A good plan is a starting point for thinking, not a contract you're bound to honor once the facts change. Now Sun Tzu takes that flexibility one step further. What if you could make the other side's plan shift too by controlling what they actually believe is happening? Sun Tzu said all warfare is based on deception. In other words, you're not just managing what's actually true. You're managing what the other person believes is true, because their decisions are based on that belief, not on the reality you actually know. That sounds cynical, but it's actually pretty ordinary. When you're capable, you don't always show your full hand. When you're weak somewhere, you don't make it obvious. The Greeks famously pretended to give up the siege of Troy, sailing their ships out of sight and leaving behind a giant wooden horse as what looked like a farewell offering. Hidden inside it were Greek soldiers. The Trojans, believing the war was over, brought the horse inside their walls as a trophy. That night, the soldiers climbed out and opened the gates for the rest of the Greek army waiting outside. The city fell, not because the Trojans were careless, but because they read the situation exactly as the Greeks wanted them to. This same logic plays out constantly in ordinary negotiation. If you let the other side know exactly how much you want the deal, you've already given away your leverage. You should seem indifferent precisely when you care the most. Sun Tzu pushes the idea of hiding your true position even further with a list of specific situations. If the enemy is secure everywhere, prepare for them anyway. It means just because you can't find a single weak point in someone right now, it doesn't mean you should stop preparing. If they're stronger, avoid them rather than proving a point. Because if someone is genuinely stronger than you, walking away isn't weakness, it's the actual smart move. If they're hot-tempered, provoke them into a mistake. Because someone with a short temper makes worse decisions the angrier they get. If you want them careless, let them believe you're weaker than you actually are, since the moment someone underestimates you and gets away with it, they relax completely. Each one asks you to override your first instinct. Sometimes that means going against your own ego, and sometimes it means deliberately feeding theirs. There's one more instruction in this same list that's easy to skim past. If the enemy's forces are united, find a way to separate them. A united front only holds as long as everyone in it actually agrees. Picture a group of friends teaming up against you, all repeating the same complaint. The instinct is to fight the whole group at once. The smarter move is to look for the person who is less convinced than the others. Maybe they are just following the mood of the group. So instead of arguing with everyone, you speak to that person directly. The group has to stop feeling unanimous, and once it does, it rarely holds together the same way. Remember, the general who wins makes many calculations before the battle even starts. The one who makes no calculations at all has already lost without knowing it. So before your next big decision, ask yourself, how many scenarios have I actually thought through? If the answer is none, that's not bravery. That's being unprepared and calling it confidence. Chapter 2. End it before it exhausts you. You can win a fight and still lose just by taking too long to finish it. So there are two rules Sun Tzu wants you to get right: how fast you end a fight, and what you do once it's over. First rule: end the fight fast, don't let it drag. Sun Tzu makes the cost concrete. He talks about the silver spent every single day. His point has nothing to do with battles or weapons. It's about resources, the cost to keep an army fed and moving. Think about it this way: every conflict you're in costs you something. Every single day it continues. A lawsuit, a price war, a rivalry that won't end. Doesn't matter if you're winning or losing. The cost keeps adding up either way. The meter is always running. Sometimes that cost is enough to bring down an entire civilization. The Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta dragged on for almost 30 years. Athens had grown so rich and so powerful that Sparta wasn't willing to let it go unchallenged. Athens had the wealth, the navy, the culture. Sparta had the better army. Neither side could fully finish the other off. By the end, Athens, once the richest, most powerful city in the Greek world, had bled itself dry. A plague that killed thousands. A massive, failed military campaign far from home that destroyed their fleet. The real cost of staying at war for an entire generation. Sparta didn't really defeat Athens through brilliance. Athens defeated itself just by refusing to stop. And the same thing happens on a much smaller scale all the time. Picture two siblings fighting over their late parents' house. The fight drags on for years. Lawyers, court dates, a relationship that gets a little more damaged every single month it continues. And by the time it's over, they've spent more than the house was even worth. There's another danger to staying in too long. When you're stuck in a long fight, you get tired. Your focus starts slipping. All your energy goes into the one battle in front of you, and everything else in your life starts running on autopilot. Your other relationships, your work, your health. That's exactly when problems show up there. The ones you never saw coming, because you were too drained to notice them in time. And by then, it's too late to be clever about it. The damage is already done. Picture two siblings locked in a rivalry for their parents' attention for years. Each one convinced the other is the real threat. And while they're busy fighting each other, a third sibling, who never competed for anything, quietly becomes the one their parents actually lean on. In the end, the fight you're fixated on is rarely the one that ends up costing you the most. So that's rule 1. End it fast. Here's rule 2. Whether you win or lose, don't walk away empty-handed. When you lose, the instinct is to resent the person who beat you. Sun Tzu says, do the opposite, use them. Think about someone who loses a promotion to a colleague. Instead of resenting them quietly, they go straight to that colleague and ask what they did differently, and they actually listen to the answer. That costs nothing but a little pride. And it turns the person who just beat you into the fastest source of exactly what you need for next time. Now flip it. What do you do when you win? Sun Tzu's answer here is almost counterintuitive too. Don't just defeat the other side. Take what they had and use it to make yourself stronger. He says a smart army doesn't keep shipping in supplies from home. It takes what it needs from enemy territory instead. Every supply you take from the enemy is a supply you don't have to drag in from back home. And it's not just about supplies, it's about people too. Don't just beat someone and walk away. Bring them with you instead of leaving them behind. He says captured soldiers shouldn't be discarded. They should be treated well and brought into your own ranks. Here's what that looks like at home. You can win an argument with your partner and still lose if you leave them humiliated. You got your point across, but you also taught them something else. Don't be fully honest with this person again. That's the trap. Someone who humiliates everyone they beat has to keep winning forever, because all they're building behind them is resentment. Someone who stays gracious instead, even after a falling out, often gets something back. Years later, that person becomes an ally again, once the original fight stops mattering. A win that costs you the relationship isn't really a win. It's just the memory of being right for one afternoon. So let's bring this back to the actual goal. End the fight fast. The longer it drags, the more it costs you. And whether you win or lose, don't walk away empty-handed. Do both, and you come out of every conflict stronger than you went in. Chapter 3. Win without having to fight. Most people think winning means crushing the other side. Sun Tzu disagrees. He says the best outcome of all is to take what you want completely intact, not destroy it. And it's not just sentimentality. Picture someone who gets a job by quietly bad-mouthing the other top candidate to the hiring manager. They get the offer, but if anyone ever finds out, no one will ever fully trust them again. Now picture someone who gets the same job by simply being the better candidate. That person keeps something the first one never gets to keep, a reputation worth having. And history actually shows this too. In the early 13th century, the Mongol armies under Genghis Khan built a reputation so terrifying that entire cities began surrendering before a single Mongol soldier appeared at their gates. Word had spread of what happened to cities that resisted, and word had also spread of how cities that opened their gates peacefully were often spared. Unlike most conquerors before him, Genghis Khan understood that a reputation, built deliberately and reinforced consistently, can do the work an army would otherwise have to do at enormous cost. You see the exact same mechanism in everyday life. Think about a parent who always follows through on a consequence. Every single time, no exceptions. Their kids stopped testing it years ago, so that parent almost never actually has to enforce anything anymore. Now compare that to a parent who threatens consequences and then never follows through. Their kids test them constantly because they've correctly calculated that resistance usually works. The first parent didn't win through more punishment. They won through a reputation their kids didn't want to bet against. Reputation is one way to disrupt an enemy before they even fight back. But it's not the only option Sun Tzu gives. He actually ranks every approach you could take, from the one that costs you the least to the one that costs you the most. The best strategy is to disrupt the enemy's plans before they're even executed. Next best is preventing them from combining forces with allies. After that comes direct confrontation in the field. And the worst option of all, the one he says you should avoid at almost any cost, is laying siege to a fortified position. A siege takes months, drains your resources, and even when it succeeds, it often costs you a third of your force in the final assault. Translate that into modern terms and you get a clear warning. Going head-on against an opponent who is deeply settled, with deep resources and home field advantage, is usually the most expensive way to win, even when it works. When Uber expanded into China, they went head-on against Didi, the local ride-sharing giant. Same market, same approach, head-to-head. Didi had something Uber couldn't easily match: local government relationships, deeper insight into Chinese riders, a product built specifically for that market. Uber poured billions into the fight, years of subsidized rides, marketing, expansion, just to keep up. In the end, Uber didn't win. They sold their China operations to Didi in exchange for a minority stake, just to get out of a fight that was bleeding them dry. That's what a modern siege looks like. Now, that second best option, preventing alliances from forming, is often the cheapest victory you can get. Most people just never think to use it. Picture this. Two siblings disagree about whether to sell their elderly parents' house or let one of them move in and take care of it. Before either one says a word to the rest of the family, one of them quietly calls their aunt, the person everyone in the family actually listens to, and explains his side first. By the time the rest of the family hears about the disagreement, the aunt has already decided who she agrees with. In the end, no argument happened and no voice was raised. So that covers how to win without much of a fight at all, but sometimes avoiding a fight isn't that simple. So how do you know if it's even worth having? Sun Tzu gives you a simple way to decide whether a fight is worth having at all. If the odds are clearly in your favor, fight. If they're roughly even, you can take the risk. But if you're seriously outmatched, the smart move is to walk away, not push through anyway. There's something almost freeing about reducing the decision down to numbers like that. Most people decide whether to fight based on how they feel in the moment, how confident they are, how unfair it feels to back down. Sun Tzu is telling you to do the math first. Let the numbers decide, not your pride. So far, everything's been about reading the fight correctly, when to engage, when to walk away. But you can do all of that right and still lose if you're sabotaging yourself from the inside. Sun Tzu gives 3 ways a leader can sabotage his own army without even realizing it. The first, ordering an advance or retreat without understanding whether the army is actually capable of it. In modern terms, that's a manager setting a deadline or a target without ever checking if the team actually has the time, people, or resources to hit it. The second, trying to run a military operation with the same rigid rules used to run civilian administration, when the two require completely different instincts. Today, that's running a crisis through the same approval chain and meetings you'd use for routine work. What works when things are calm slows you down when they're not. And the third, assigning officers without any real discrimination about who's actually suited for the role. That's promoting someone or putting them in charge of something based on seniority or convenience, instead of whether they're actually the right person for that specific job. Each of these creates the same result: confusion and distrust inside your own ranks. and an enemy who doesn't even need to attack you because you're already falling apart from within. So that's how a leader quietly destroys their own side. Now flip it around. What does it actually take to win? Sun Tzu gives 5 conditions for victory. He will win who knows when to fight and when not to. He will win who knows how to use both large and small forces, which means knowing when to commit everything you've got and when a smaller, more precise move actually works better. For example, you don't always need a 2-hour conversation to fix a disagreement. Sometimes a short, sincere, "I'm sorry you were right," does more than hours of talking ever could. He will win whose army is animated by the same spirit throughout its ranks. Basically, everyone's actually pulling in the same direction, not just there for the paycheck. He will win who, having prepared himself, waits to catch an unprepared opponent. And he will win who has real freedom to act without a nervous leader interfering from a distance. It's about whether the people above you have the discipline to let you actually do the job they hired you for. A brilliant strategist held back by a leadership team that micromanages every decision will lose to a merely competent strategist who's actually allowed to operate. But none of that matters if you're missing one thing. Know the enemy and know yourself, and you need not fear the outcome of 100 battles. You're invincible. Know yourself but not the enemy, and you'll win as often as you lose. Someone can know their own strengths and weaknesses perfectly. Journal about them, work with a therapist, do all the inner work, and still keep losing the same argument with their partner if they've never actually tried to understand how their partner thinks under pressure. Knowing yourself gets you a 50-50 shot. Knowing the other person is what actually tips things in your favor. Know neither and you lose every single time. That's really the whole game. Know yourself and know what you're up against. That's preparation. Planning, counting the cost, deciding if the fight is even worth it. But at some point you stop preparing and start moving. Phase 2. How you move and position yourself. A great plan falls apart fast if you don't know how to act on it. So the next 5 chapters are the mechanics of movement. Chapter 4. Secure yourself before you try to win. In this chapter, we're going through 4 steps that lead to an actual win. First, secure your position. The most dangerous mistake in any competition isn't losing. It's trying to win before you've made losing impossible. Notice the order. Defense first. Then, when the opportunity comes, you act on it. That action is what Sun Tzu calls attacking. Most people do the opposite. They go looking for a big win before they've even secured their own position, and they end up exposed the moment things don't go their way. Picture someone who moves in with a new partner, quits their job, and relocates to a new city, all within the same few months. They're betting everything on the relationship working out. That's exactly this mistake. The relationship might even feel wonderful for a while, and it'll look like progress to everyone watching from the outside. But underneath that leap, the foundation was never actually secured. The savings, the independent friendships, the sense of self that doesn't depend on the relationship. None of that was built first. And when things go wrong, that person has nothing to fall back on. Sun Tzu makes a sharp distinction here that's easy to miss. Securing yourself against defeat is entirely within your control. Defeating the enemy, or in this case, getting the relationship, the job, the outcome you actually want, depends on someone or something else giving you the chance to. You can guarantee the first one. You can never guarantee the second. So the skilled competitor focuses obsessively on what they can actually control. Their own discipline, their own preparation, their own position. Because the win itself isn't something you force into existence through pure willpower. It's something that arrives when conditions finally allow it. So far, everything's pointed toward defense. But does that mean defense is always the right move? Not quite. Standing on the defensive signals insufficient strength. Attacking signals a genuine surplus of it. Here's what he means. Defense is the right move when you're genuinely the weaker side. Attack is the right move when you actually have the strength for it. The mistake isn't choosing defense. It's choosing it for the wrong reason, out of habit or fear, instead of an honest read of where you actually stand. And the same goes for attacking out of ego when you don't actually have the strength to back it up. The real skill isn't picking a side and sticking to it. It's reading your actual position correctly and choosing the posture it actually calls for. So let's say you get all of this right. You secure yourself, you read the moment correctly, and you eventually win. Here's the thing. Not every win looks the same. And to actually see it, you need to avoid 2 traps. Trap 1. Assuming that because something looked impressive, It actually was difficult. Trap 2. Assuming that because something looked easy, it wasn't actually difficult. Let's start with Trap 1. Sun Tzu uses 3 small images to make this point land. Lifting a single autumn hair isn't proof of great strength. Seeing the sun and moon isn't proof of unusually sharp eyesight. And hearing thunder isn't proof of unusually sharp hearing. Each of these sounds like it could be a feat, but anyone can do them, which means they were never actually difficult in the first place. And this isn't just an ancient idea. You see it everywhere today. Posting constantly about how busy and fulfilled your life is isn't proof that it actually is. Being the loudest person in an argument isn't proof of being right. There's a difference between performing effort and actually putting in the work. And most people watching only ever see the performance, so that's Trap 1, mistaking the performance for the real work. Now, Trap 2, the opposite mistake. Assuming that because something looked easy or looked like nothing happened at all, it wasn't actually difficult. For the first one, some wins are loud and obvious, and some are so quiet almost nobody even notices they happened. Sun Tzu admires the second one, and the trap is failing to see why. He says that to see victory only when everyone else can already see it isn't real skill. Winning a battle and having the whole empire shout "well done" isn't the mark of a brilliant general. If it was obvious enough for everyone to cheer, it wasn't actually that hard to pull off. Real skill is invisible. The truly excellent fighter wins so easily that nobody gives them credit for wisdom or courage, because nobody outside the situation can even tell how much was actually at stake. Chess players have a name for exactly this idea: prophylaxis. It's the habit of spending a move improving your own position, closing off your opponent's options instead of rushing toward an attack that isn't actually ready yet. Weaker players see a prophylactic move and think nothing happened. Strong players recognize it as the move that quietly made every one of their opponent's plans collapse a few moves later, without a single piece ever being captured. So why does a quiet move like that actually work? It's because it didn't leave anything behind for the opponent to use. And making sure there's nothing to exploit, it turns out, is the real secret behind almost all invisible mastery. So that's how to recognize real skill when you see it. But how do you actually win? He adds that the skilled fighter wins by making no mistakes. And making no mistakes is itself what guarantees victory, because by the time the fight actually starts, the opponent was already beaten. This is precisely the logic behind quietly taking care of your health for 30 years instead of waiting for a crisis to fix it. Nobody throws a parade for the heart attack that never happened. The person with the best long-term health rarely looks impressive day to day. They just have far fewer emergencies because the discipline was built into decades of boring maintenance, not a crisis they had to recover from later. The same pattern shows up in investing. The investor who quietly earns steady, unremarkable returns year after year almost never gets written about. There's no story there. The investor who makes one huge, risky bet that pays off gets profiled and celebrated, right up until the year that same risk wipes out a decade of gains in one bad call. Sun Tzu wouldn't be interested in the celebrated one. He'd be quietly studying the boring one's discipline. The Romans understood this on a civilizational scale. For centuries, instead of constantly chasing glamorous conquests, they built fortified frontiers like Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain, a defensive structure that didn't conquer anything new, but made an entire border essentially impossible to casually overrun. It wasn't exciting. Nobody wrote songs about a wall. But it secured the empire's position for generations, which is exactly the kind of unglamorous, foundational work Sun Tzu is pointing you toward. So if avoiding mistakes is really the whole game, how do you actually build a position with no mistakes in it? Sun Tzu gives you the literal steps, a chain of cause and effect that's worth slowing down for. Measurement leads to estimation. Estimation leads to calculation. Calculation leads to balancing the odds. And balancing the odds finally leads to victory. Each step depends entirely on the one before it. You cannot skip to the end. Think about how a sprinter actually prepares for a championship race. First comes raw measurement, exact times. Just numbers, no interpretation yet. Then estimation, turning that time into a sense of where they actually stand against the competition. Then calculation, figuring out exactly what needs to improve and by how much. Then balancing the chances, an honest read on whether that gap can actually close in the time they have left. Only after all 4 steps does anyone get something close to a real forecast of victory. Chapter 5. What happens before you act? Think about a kitchen with just eggs, flour, butter, sugar, and milk. 5 ingredients, and yet that's an entire bakery. Pancakes, brioche, cookies, cake. The same 5 things combined differently every single time. So a small number of things combined well can scale almost endlessly. And it's not just kitchens. Sun Tzu points to the exact same pattern everywhere he looks. There are only 5 notes in a traditional Chinese musical scale, and yet musicians have never run out of melodies. There are only a handful of primary colors, and painters have never run out of images. Sun Tzu says the exact same thing is true of command itself. A handful of clear signals, a horn, a flag, a simple chain of orders, and that same small toolkit can coordinate 10 people or 100,000. The tools don't multiply, they just get applied at a bigger scale. A parent with one child often assumes that managing a house full of 5 would require a much more complex system. Mostly, it requires the same underlying discipline: clear routines, clear expectations. Older kids given real responsibility for younger ones, so the parent isn't actually managing 5 individuals every single minute. They're managing a small, well-understood system. So that's the pattern. A small number of building blocks combined well can scale almost endlessly. But having the right building blocks isn't enough on its own. You also have to know exactly when to actually use them. And Sun Tzu is very specific about what knowing when actually means. It's not about being fast, and it's not about being patient. It's about being patient first and then completely decisive the instant the moment arrives. He compares the quality of good decision-making to the swoop of a falcon. A falcon doesn't circle indefinitely weighing its options once it's actually decided to strike. But it also doesn't strike before it's actually found the right moment. The decisiveness comes after the patience, never instead of it. A leader who keeps deliberating after all the information is already in front of them is making the same mistake as a leader who acts before they've even identified the target. Both get the timing wrong, just in opposite directions. But patience here doesn't mean doing nothing. Sun Tzu calls it energy. By that he means something closer to controlled force, released at exactly the right moment. He compares it to a crossbow. The energy is built up slowly, deliberately, as you draw the string back. The decision is the instant you release the arrow. Most people are good at one of these 2 things and terrible at the other. They either build up enormous potential and never release it, or they release force impulsively without ever having built anything up to release. So how do you actually keep building that energy day after day without ever running dry? This is where the building blocks come back in. The reason is simple. A small set of building blocks, recombined endlessly, never actually runs dry the way a single fixed trick does. A comedian with one great joke has one great night. A comedian who has mastered a handful of underlying structures, timing, misdirection, callback, escalation, never runs out of material. Audiences who've seen 100 of their shows still find the 101st one fresh. The building blocks don't change. The combinations do. So if you want to find your own version of this, the question isn't, what's my one big move? It's, what are the 5 or 6 small things I always come back to that I could combine differently depending on the situation? So far, everything's been about what you build and when you release it. But getting that right doesn't mean you're safe yet. 2 things can still quietly undo all of it. How this actually looks from the outside, because misreading that can make you panic when things are actually fine, or walk straight into a trap set by someone who looks weaker than they are, and who's actually doing the work. Because lean too hard on one person, and the whole thing becomes fragile. Let's start with how it looks. Sun Tzu makes a point that feels paradoxical. Real discipline can look like disorder from the outside, and real strength can look like weakness. And here's the thing. Once you understand this, you can use it deliberately. The appearance of disorder, executed with perfect discipline underneath, becomes a tool. The appearance of weakness, backed by real strength, becomes a trap. This isn't about literally being weak or disorganized. It's about controlling what those appearances can do for you. Here's what the appearance of disorder looks like as a tool. A busy household with 5 kids and 2 working parents can look like chaos to a guest walking in the door. Shoes everywhere. 3 conversations happening at once. Nobody apparently in charge. But to the family living it, almost none of that is actually disorder. Everyone already knows who handles homework, who handles dinner, who handles the dog. The lack of a visible chain of command isn't disorder. It's order that outsiders simply can't see. And here's what the appearance of weakness looks like as a trap. The Mongol armies of the 13th century turned this into one of the most devastating tactics in military history. They would feign retreat, appearing to break and flee in panic. The enemy, smelling an easy victory, would chase, breaking their own discipline in the process. Then the Mongol horsemen would suddenly wheel around alongside reinforcements that had been waiting in concealment the entire time. The pursuers would find themselves surrounded and exhausted. The disorder was never real. It was manufactured with total discipline for the only purpose of making the enemy abandon theirs. So that's how real order can hide inside apparent chaos. A separate question worth asking, even once everything is well organized: who's actually doing the work? Sun Tzu's answer is simple. Figure out what each person does best and put them in that role. You see the cost of getting this wrong constantly in the workplace. A manager gives every important task through their one strongest employee. They think they're protecting quality. What they're actually building is a system that collapses the moment that person takes a vacation, gets sick, or leaves. The team was never actually a team. It was one person with extra steps. A well-built team doesn't have that single point of failure. Now imagine you've done everything right. Here's what determines whether all of that actually pays off. Two things: the discipline to keep building quietly, and being in the right place for it to pay off. Let's start with the discipline. Think about someone who spends years getting quietly better at something, a language, an instrument, a craft. Nothing dramatic happens for a long time. Then one day they're suddenly, overnight, impressive. The real work happened long before anyone could see it. That's exactly what Sun Tzu means. Now the second thing: discipline gets you here, but it only pays off if you're actually positioned correctly. Picture two people pushing a boulder. One boulder is square, sitting on flat ground. No matter how hard they push, it barely moves. All that effort wasted because of the shape and the ground it's sitting on. The other boulder is round, sitting at the top of a steep hill. One small push, and it's rolling on its own, unstoppable. The difference isn't how hard anyone pushed. It's the shape of the boulder and the ground it was sitting on. That's Sun Tzu's real point. Your job, long before you take action, is to make sure you're the round boulder, positioned on the slope, ready to move. Chapter 6. Make them play your game. This chapter is about one thing. Never walk into a negotiation, an interview, or a fight on someone else's terms if you can set the terms first. And Sun Tzu shows you exactly how to do that in 3 steps. First, you secure your own position. Then, from that position, you press on them. And throughout all of it, you adapt. First, protect and position yourself. Sun Tzu lays out 5 moves for that. Get there first, stay hidden, know when to leave, hide your weak points, and hit hard in one place instead of everywhere at once. Do all 5, and the fight is already leaning your way before it starts. Move 1. Arrive first and rested. Walk in 10 minutes early and you're already thinking clearly before anything begins. Walk in rushed and out of breath, and you're playing catch-up in your own head before you've even started. But arriving first only helps you if nobody knows you're there yet. Move 2. Stay secret, harder to read. Information asymmetry is one of the purest forms of advantage there is. They don't know what you're planning, you know exactly what they're planning. That gap is the whole advantage. Sun Tzu calls this combination of subtlety and secrecy almost divine, saying that through it a strategist becomes invisible, inaudible, and effectively holds the enemy's fate in their own hands. Someone training in secret for an audition, telling almost nobody until they're ready, isn't being secretive out of paranoia. They understand that the moment people know what they're attempting, every casual comment, every doubt someone means kindly, reshapes what they're working on before it's even done. Secrecy protects you while you're building something. It doesn't protect you if things turn. That's when speed works the other way. Move 3. Retreat fast when needed. The skill is knowing the difference between an opening and a trap. An opening is where your effort can move easily. If you move toward the enemy's weak point, you seem unstoppable, not because you're magically stronger, but because there is very little there to stop you. A trap is where your effort gets absorbed, delayed, and drained. If you retreat before the other side can organize around you, you remain safe. Not because nothing went wrong, but because you left before the situation could close in. Most people think about how fast they can move in. Sun Tzu is also asking how fast you can move out. How quickly can you leave when the situation starts working against you? Think of someone who just got passed over for a promotion. He sees it clearly. This place has made its decision about him. So that same week he starts looking elsewhere, quietly, without announcing it. 6 months later, he's somewhere better. The person who waits and who tells themselves it might change, who gives it one more year, is now a year behind. more tired, more stuck. And the longer they wait, the harder it gets to leave. The skill is knowing when to leave before the situation takes more from you than it ever gave. But all three of these moves only work if nobody can see where you're exposed. Move 4. Conceal your weak points. Sun Tzu insists that concealing your own dispositions is itself a weapon. If the enemy can't tell where you're strong and where you're vulnerable, they're forced to defend everywhere at once. And defending everywhere at once means defending nowhere well. Think of a basketball team that never shows the same play twice. The defense doesn't know where to focus, so they spread across the whole court. And the moment they spread, a gap opens. Hiding your weak points is half of it. The other half is making sure your strength actually lands in one place at the right moment. Move 5. Concentrate your force at the right time and place. If you know exactly when and where something will be decided, you can bring everything you have to that one moment. The side that doesn't know has to cover every possibility, which means they're never fully ready for any of them. Think of a family with a relative going through a crisis. One cousin calls Monday. An aunt visits 3 weeks later. Someone else sends money but never shows up. Each gesture means something, but nothing actually shifts. Now imagine the same family agreeing, we all show up this Saturday together with a plan. The impact is completely different because they did it together at the right moment. Concentrated force changes things. Scattered effort just fills time. Second, press on the enemy from that secure position. Now that you're secure, you stop reacting and start dictating. Sun Tzu lays out 4 moves for that. Impose your will, provoke them into revealing themselves, attack where they're weak, and force them to defend everywhere. Do this well, and the enemy ends up fighting on ground you chose, not ground they chose. Move 1. Impose your will, make them react to you. The clever competitor doesn't react to the situation. They shape it. Sun Tzu gives 3 ways to do that. If they're comfortable, disturb them, because a comfortable opponent is a focused one. Take job hunting. Most hiring managers are comfortable inside the normal process. Applicants apply through the same job board, wait in the same line, and hope to be picked. But one person skips that routine. They find the hiring manager's email and send them a specific idea about a problem the company actually has. If they're well supplied, cut their supply because an opponent who can't sustain themselves has to move on your terms. Think of 2 competing businesses. A small competitor is surviving because one big client keeps them alive. You don't go after the competitor directly. You go after that client relationship. Better service, better price, better attention. The moment that client leaves, the competitor can't sustain themselves. They have to change their position or disappear. That is what cutting supply means. You don't go after the competitor directly. You remove what keeps them alive. If they're settled somewhere strong, give them a reason to move because the moment they leave their position, they're on ground they didn't choose. A chess player does this constantly, threatening a minor piece just to make the opponent spend a move defending it, opening up the real attack on the other side of the board. The threat was never the point. Making them look the wrong way was. Forcing a reaction is useful on its own. It's even more useful for what it tells you afterward. Move 2. Provoke them until they reveal what they're protecting. When you force someone to respond, they show you exactly what they are trying to protect. Think of any negotiation. Floating a strong opening position isn't always meant to be accepted. Sometimes the entire purpose is to watch how the other person reacts. What do they push back on immediately? What do they let slide? The opening position was almost beside the point. The reaction was the information. But sometimes what that reaction reveals isn't just information, it's the actual weak point. In 1187, Saladin drew the Crusader army away from its water sources into dry terrain in the height of summer. The Crusaders were thirsty, exhausted, and on ground they hadn't chosen. By the time the fight started, they were already defeated. Saladin never had to be stronger than them on paper. He just had to make them move somewhere their strength could no longer protect them. Saladin didn't provoke the Crusaders just to watch them move. He used what that revealed to hit the one thing they couldn't defend. Move 3. Attack where they're weakest, not where they're strongest. Most people lose because they attack the strongest point directly. Sun Tzu says do the opposite. Find where they stopped paying attention. Take a small coffee shop opening across the street from a Starbucks. They can't compete on price. They can't compete on locations. They can't compete on brand recognition. If they try to fight Starbucks on any of those fronts, they lose before they even open. So they don't. Starbucks optimized for volume. Thousands of cups, thousands of locations as fast as possible. That's their strength. But at that scale, the coffee itself became secondary. The small shop goes exactly there. They slow down. They obsess over one specific brewing method. They care about the coffee itself, not how fast it gets out the door. Starbucks can't follow them there. The moment they slow down, the whole model breaks. You don't need to be bigger. You need to find the thing they gave up to become big. Keep hitting the spot they can't cover, and something else starts happening. They can't protect everything at once anymore. Move 4. Force them to defend everywhere. Spread them thin. If you force your opponent to guard every position at once, he ends up weak at all of them. You don't need to be stronger. You just need to attack from more directions than he can cover. Think of someone being undermined by a colleague at work. The easy mistake is to fight back directly. Confront him, argue, defend himself in meetings. The colleague sees it coming and prepares for exactly that. Instead, the person being undermined says nothing. He quietly builds credibility with the manager. He develops relationships with other teams. He makes himself visible on projects the other colleague has nothing to do with. Now the colleague has a problem. To limit him, he'd have to counter all of that simultaneously. Undermine him with the manager. Isolate him from other teams. Minimize his visibility on every project. He can't. Nobody can defend everywhere at once. By the time the colleague realizes what happened, the person he was trying to limit has already built ground on every side. Third, adapt like water. Water does not argue with the terrain. It follows it. If there is a wall, it flows around it. If there is a crack, it enters through the crack. If the ground slopes, it moves with the slope. It doesn't fight the obstacle. It finds the way through. Sun Tzu says this is how you should fight. There are no fixed conditions. There is only the situation in front of you right now. And this is where most people get it wrong. They find one move that worked once and then they keep repeating it as if the move itself was magic. But it worked because it fit that exact moment. Take the funniest story you've ever told at a dinner party. It landed perfectly. Everyone laughed. The timing was right, the room was right, the moment was right. So you tell it again, word for word, to the same group. And this time, it doesn't land. Because the conditions changed. They already know the twist. The surprise is gone. The same thing happens everywhere. Maybe being silent worked once in an argument because the other person needed space to calm down. But the next time, that same silence reads as cold, or worse, as giving up. Maybe walking away worked once because the fight genuinely wasn't worth having. But the next time, walking away looks like avoidance and the problem just grows in the background. The same tactic in different conditions produces a completely different result. Do not repeat the tactic that won your last victory. Read the situation again every time. Because the real skill was never the tactic. The real skill was knowing when that tactic fit. That is what it means to be like water, not having no direction, but refusing to keep the same shape when the ground has changed. Chapter 7. How to Move Without Burning Out. Think of someone you know who works hard, pushes toward a goal, and burns out before getting there. The problem probably wasn't a lack of talent. He just moved the wrong way. Sun Tzu calls this the hardest problem in warfare, not the fighting itself, but everything that happens on the way to the fight. Most people never make it to the fight. They exhaust themselves getting there. Move wrong and you lose before the battle even starts. Move right and the fight is already half won before it begins. Sun Tzu breaks this down into 4 problems everyone faces when pursuing a goal. How to choose the right path. How to move without destroying your own strength. How to stay adaptable when conditions change. And how to know when to act, when to wait, and when to walk away. Problem 1. Choose the right path. Most people assume the fastest way to a goal is the most direct one. Sun Tzu says that's almost never true. The direct path looks shorter, but it runs straight into obstacles that slow you down or stop you completely. The indirect path looks longer, but it goes around all of them and takes you to the same goal with far more energy left to actually use when you get there. Think of someone who leaves a stable career in their 30s to retrain completely. Everyone around him sees a risky detour, but he isn't hitting the same obstacles his peers are. The wrong industry they never questioned. The dead-end promotions that cost them years. The exhaustion of doing work that stopped mattering a long time ago. 2 years later, he's doing work he actually cares about. The friend who stayed on the safe path is still stuck, still fighting the same obstacles, still waiting for something to change. The detour wasn't a mistake. It was the only route that avoided every obstacle in the way. When everyone crowds the obvious route, the indirect one is where the real advantage lives. The indirect path isn't a detour. It's the strategy. Problem 2. Don't destroy yourself getting there. Sun Tzu is specific about how you destroy yourself on the way. There are 3 ways it happens. You move too fast, you neglect the resources that keep you going, or you navigate unknown territory without a guide. Miss any one of these and you lose before you ever reach your goal. Mistake 1. The cost of moving too fast. Moving fast feels like winning. Sun Tzu says it's often how you fall behind. An army that force marches at double speed to grab an advantage will lose its slower soldiers along the way, arrive fragmented, and hand the enemy an easy victory over an exhausted force. Push at a more moderate pace and you keep more of your strength intact, even if you arrive slightly later. Think of someone launching a business too early, before the product is ready, before the team is solid, before the first customers are actually satisfied. They move fast to beat competitors, but they arrive unprepared, reputation already damaged, fixing problems they created by rushing. The competitor who took 6 more months arrived second but lasted 10 times longer. Mistake 2. You neglect the logistics. Most people focus on the goal. They forget about everything that keeps them going on the way there. Sun Tzu put it like this: an army without its baggage train is lost. Without provisions, it is lost. Without a base of supply, it is lost. 3 different ways to lose, all caused by the same mistake, treating logistics as less important than the fighting itself. In plain terms, you can't win if you run out of what keeps you going. Think of someone who says yes to everything. New relationship, demanding job, packed social calendar, new project. From the outside, it looks impressive. But quietly, underneath, they're skipping sleep, ignoring their finances, letting the friendships that actually keep them grounded slowly fade. The support system is collapsing. They just don't see it yet. And then one day, something breaks. Not the job, not the relationship. The person holding it all together. Mistake 3. Having no local knowledge. Sun Tzu is direct. You cannot use unfamiliar ground to your advantage without someone who actually knows it. No amount of preparation replaces someone who already knows the terrain you're walking into. In 53 BC, the Roman general Crassus led 7 legions into Parthian territory, convinced he could win quickly against an enemy he underestimated. He relied on a local guide who, it turned out, was working for the other side the entire time. His legions arrived exhausted, poorly supplied, in terrain they didn't understand. They were surrounded and crushed at the Battle of Carrhae. Crassus didn't survive. He had the numbers. He had the equipment. He had the reputation of Rome behind him. But none of it mattered, because he missed one thing: someone who actually knew the ground. And that cost him everything. The same thing happens off the battlefield. Think of someone who joins a new company and never bothers to understand the unwritten rules, who actually makes decisions, which relationships matter, what topics are off limits. They keep making avoidable mistakes that any colleague who'd been there 6 months could have told them in one conversation. One honest insider saves you months of avoidable mistakes. The third problem is staying adaptable enough to handle whatever you find along the way. Sun Tzu gives 2 tools for that. First, know whether to move together or apart. His point is simple. There is no right answer between concentrating your forces and dividing them. The only right answer is reading the situation in front of you. Think of someone writing a book. The writing has to happen alone. No committee can find the right words for you, but at some point, the door has to open. You need readers who tell you what isn't working, an editor who sees what you're too close to see, people who help the book find its audience. The writer who never opens the door produces a book nobody reads. The writer who never closes it never finishes one. The mistake isn't picking one approach. It's never changing it. Concentrate when the moment calls for it. Divide when it doesn't. The structure is a tool, not a personality trait. Second, know which version of yourself the moment actually needs. Sun Tzu describes 4 modes every strategist needs to be able to switch between. Let your speed be like the wind, your discipline like the forest, your aggression like fire, your stillness like a mountain. Each one is right in a different moment. Fast when speed wins, patient when waiting wins, aggressive when the opening appears, calm when it doesn't. The problem is most people only have one mode that feels natural, and they use it everywhere. The aggressive person treats every situation like a moment to attack, even the ones that call for patience. For example, a manager gets negative feedback from his team. Instead of listening and taking time to understand the problem, he immediately calls a meeting and imposes a new plan. The cautious person treats every situation like a moment to wait, even the rare ones that demand speed. Take the example of a competitor who launches a similar product. The cautious person waits, gathering more data, running more tests, asking for more opinions. By the time they finally move, the competitor has already captured the market. Neither is wrong as a default, both are wrong as a habit. The goal isn't to pick your strongest mode, it's to read the moment and choose the right one, even when it's the one that doesn't come naturally to you. Problem 4. Know when to act and when to hold. That's the hardest part. Knowing exactly when to move, when to hold, and how to finish strong without losing what you've built. Sun Tzu gives 7 independent rules for that. Rule 1. Communication under pressure. When people can't communicate clearly under pressure, they stop knowing what to do, who does what, and when to move. On a battlefield, too loud for shouted orders, tens of thousands of soldiers need to move as one. Sun Tzu's solution: drums, gongs, and flags. A signal everyone already knows, so nobody has to figure out the plan in the moment they need it most. Think of a fire breaking out at home. 3 people are in the house. In that moment, nobody stops to discuss who does what. There's no time. The family that never talked about this freezes because they never decided. Who calls emergency services? Who gets the kids out? Who checks if everyone is accounted for? The family that talked through it once, even briefly, moves instantly. Each person already knows their role. No discussion needed. Rule 2. Strike when their energy drops. Energy isn't constant. It peaks, then fades. A soldier's spirit is sharpest in the morning. By midday, it starts to drop. By evening, their mind is already somewhere else. The smart commander doesn't attack when the enemy is fresh. He waits. He lets their energy drain. Then he strikes. Anyone who's watched a long sporting event has seen this exact pattern. A team comes out fast and aggressive in the first quarter. Loud, sharp, dangerous. Their opponent absorbs it. Stays disciplined, doesn't panic. By the fourth quarter, the aggressive team is tired and sloppy. The patient team is facing a completely different opponent than the one that looked unstoppable an hour ago. The scoreboard doesn't show energy, but energy decided the game long before the final whistle. Rule 3. Stay calm while they fall apart. Think of watching someone who wronged you, an ex, a rival, a former colleague, going through a very public collapse. The temptation is to pile on. Say the thing you've been saving. Make sure everyone knows you were right about them. Don't. Not out of kindness, out of strategy. Someone in genuine chaos will damage their own reputation faster and more thoroughly than anything you could add. The moment you pile on, 2 things happen. You look petty, and suddenly they have a villain to rally against. You just handed them away back. Staying quiet is the move. Let their chaos do the work. Rule 4. Leave them a door. When you surround a desperate opponent, leave them an escape route. Don't press a cornered enemy too hard. Sun Tzu's reasoning isn't about mercy. It's about cost. A person with absolutely no way out stops behaving rationally. They have nothing left to lose, so they fight with everything they have. And that ferocity can cost you more than just letting them retreat would have. Think of a salary negotiation where you're the hiring manager and you hold all the cards. The candidate needs this job. You could push hard, offer the lowest salary, the worst conditions, and make it clear they have no room to negotiate. They'd probably accept. But now they're inside your company, resentful, with nothing left to lose. They underperform quietly. They complain to colleagues. They leave the moment something better appears. You maybe won the negotiation, but you lost everything that came after. To avoid such a situation, leave them a door, even a narrow one, a slightly better salary than your opening offer, a title that sounds good on their resume, 1 flexible working day per week. Most people given a way out will take it, and you get the result you wanted without the fight you didn't need. Rule 5. Don't trust easy wins. Think of someone in an argument who suddenly agrees with everything you say. Within seconds, they're agreeing with everything. No fight, no friction. That's not always a win. Sometimes it's a way of ending the conversation without actually changing anything. They let you feel like you won, so you stop pushing. The issue stays unresolved. They just bought themselves time. Sun Tzu's rule is simple. If the agreement looks too easy, ask yourself why they'd want you to feel like you won. Rule 6. Think before you move. Moving fast in the wrong direction is worse than moving slowly in the right one. Think of someone who gets criticized at work and fires back an angry email immediately. Fast, decisive, no hesitation. But he misread the situation. The criticism wasn't an attack, it was feedback. The email he just sent made him look defensive and difficult. 1 minute of thinking before sending would have saved weeks of damage. Rule 7. Choose your terrain. Don't attack uphill. Going uphill costs you twice the effort for half the result. And don't stand in the way of someone coming at you downhill. Let them pass. Wait for their momentum to run out. Going downhill, the terrain does half the work for you. In war, the hill is a real obstacle. But everywhere else, the hill is the moment, the audience, and the ground you chose to compete on. Think of someone trying to win over a room that already admires his rival. He's competing on the rival's strongest ground, in front of an audience already leaning the other way. Every point he scores costs twice as much effort. Every point the rival scores lands twice as hard. That's fighting uphill. Now catch that same rival after a public setback. His confidence is shaken. The audience is uncertain. The same contest, completely different terrain. That's fighting downhill. The only question that matters isn't whether you can win. It's whether you're fighting uphill or down. Chapter 8. Know which rules you're allowed to break. You've been told to work hard and results will follow, to stay calm under pressure, to always respect the hierarchy, to treat others the way you want to be treated. You have rules for every situation, but every single one of them has a situation where following it is exactly the wrong move. So the real skill isn't knowing the rules, it's knowing when they no longer apply. Because situations change, and reality doesn't stop to check the manual before it changes. Sun Tzu gives 3 specific examples of when the normal advice flips completely. A road that looks like the fastest route, but leads straight into an ambush. Think of the obvious career move that everyone recommends. That puts you exactly where your competition wants you. A target that looks weak and easy to take, but costs more than it's worth. Think of the client, the deal, or the argument you could win, but winning it drains so much time and energy that you end up weaker than before. An order from your own leadership that will lead your team into disaster. Think of the company policy, the process, the instruction from above that made sense when it was written. But the situation has changed and nobody updated the manual. The point isn't to ignore everything you've been taught. The point is to understand why the rule exists. Because the moment conditions change and you don't notice, the rule becomes a trap. Think of an airline pilot. He has a checklist for almost every situation. But he's also trained to recognize the rare moment when following that checklist exactly would be the wrong call. In 1989, United Airlines Flight 232 lost all 3 hydraulic systems simultaneously. No checklist covered this. It had never happened before. The captain had one choice: improvise. For 44 minutes, the crew steered a plane with no steering, using engine thrust alone. Something no pilot had ever trained for. 185 people survived a crash that should have killed everyone. Knowing when to break the rule is the starting point, but it doesn't tell you what to replace it with. Sun Tzu gives 3 principles for what to do instead. Principle 1. Weigh the disadvantage alongside the advantage. Every opportunity has a downside. A smart leader looks at both at the same time, not just the upside. Focus only on the upside and you'll walk straight into a trap that looked exactly like an opportunity. The discipline isn't pessimism. It's checking what's on the back of the card before you reach for it. Principle 2. Prepare for problems before they arrive. Don't rely on the hope that trouble won't come. Prepare for it anyway. Think of an emergency fund. It costs you something every month to maintain. Most months, nothing happens and it feels pointless. But the month something goes wrong, job loss, medical bill, broken car, that fund is the only reason you don't lose everything. The person who never saves because emergencies are rare is right, until the one emergency that proves them wrong. Principle 3. Keep your rivals occupied. Keep a powerful rival busy with small irritations and minor problems. If they're constantly putting out fires, they never have the time or energy to come after you seriously. But turn this around for a moment. If you can never quite focus on what actually matters, if your week keeps disappearing into small fires, minor conflicts, and other people's urgent requests, ask yourself one honest question. Is that just bad luck? Or does someone have a quiet interest in you never having a calm enough moment to think? Those 3 principles require clear judgment. But what happens when your own personality overrides that judgment at exactly the wrong moment? Here are 5 flaws that destroy you, not from the outside, but from the inside. Recklessness. Acts too fast without thinking. Cowardice. Avoids the necessary confrontation until it's too late. A hot temper can be deliberately provoked into a mistake. Oversensitive honor makes irrational decisions just to avoid looking weak. Excessive concern for his own people sounds noble until an enemy exploits it. None of these look like flaws in the moment. They feel like courage, caution, passion, pride, or loyalty. That's exactly what makes them dangerous. Think of someone with a hot temper. One pointed comment in a meeting is enough to provoke a public outburst. That one moment of lost composure can undo years of credibility. Think of cowardice, not the visible kind, the kind that shows up as avoiding a difficult conversation, delaying a decision indefinitely, letting a problem quietly get worse because addressing it feels too uncomfortable. By the time they act, the situation is already out of control. Think of excessive loyalty. A manager keeps an underperforming employee on the team because they've worked together for years. He knows the work isn't good enough, but letting them go feels like a betrayal. So he says nothing, covers for them, redistributes their work to others. By the time he finally acts, the whole team has noticed, morale has dropped, and 3 good people have already left because of it. Think of recklessness. A founder launches before the product is ready, before the team is aligned, before a single real customer has been heard. He believes momentum is everything, but he arrives unprepared, reputation already damaged, fixing problems he created by rushing. Nobody sabotaged him. He did it to himself. Think of oversensitive honor. A manager gets criticized in front of his team. The feedback is fair, but it feels like an attack, so he doubles down on a position he knows is wrong, just to avoid looking weak. The project pays for it. The moment that triggered it, nobody even remembered it the next day. The lesson isn't to eliminate ambition, courage, or loyalty. It's to know which of these 5 is yours before someone else finds it first. Because when an army, a company, a career, or a relationship is destroyed, the cause will almost always trace back to one of these 5 flaws. You know how to prepare and how to move, but both fall apart if you misread the situation. Phase 3. How you read the world and yourself. You can miss the warning signs. You can ignore your own blind spots. You can act on information that turns out to be false. And when that happens, the best plan and the sharpest movement stop mattering. It comes down to reading the situation and yourself clearly. Chapter 9. Read the small signals early. Every situation gives you information before the problem becomes obvious. The skill is learning how to read it. Think of a wildland firefighting commander who looks at a column of smoke from miles away and know almost exactly what the fire's about to do, where it'll spread, where it'll stop, where it's about to hit a point of no return. He isn't guessing. He trained himself to read the landscape as information. Sun Tzu applies this same skill to 3 things: reading the environment around you, reading the small signals people give away, and understanding what the signals from your own side are telling you about your leadership. First, read the ground before you move. Every army prefers high ground over low, sunny positions over dark ones, solid, healthy terrain over swamps and ravines. Because armies that camped in the wrong conditions got sick before the first battle. The terrain decided the campaign before a single battle happens. The same thing happens today. Whether it's your home, your work environment, or your sleep schedule, nobody thinks about the physical conditions they operate in until something goes wrong, and those are always the first thing that fails you. Sun Tzu maps out every type of ground: mountains, rivers, valleys, open plains. The approach changes for each one, but some principles apply everywhere, regardless of the ground. Never walk into an unfamiliar situation without understanding it first. Get to the strongest position available and hold it: the job, the relationship, the role where you have the most leverage. When you've crossed a difficult moment, a hard conversation, a risky move, don't linger in it. Move forward fast. Avoid the complicated, messy situations that look manageable from the outside. They're exactly where things go wrong and where you lose control fastest. If someone is making a mistake, don't move immediately. Wait until they're fully committed. Halfway in, they can still pull back. All the way in, they can't. That last rule is worth stopping on. The longer someone commits to a mistake, the less room they have to recover. Sometimes the situation becomes more costly for them, not less, if you simply let it develop a little further first. But those principles assume you had a choice about which ground to stand on. Sometimes you don't. The job is bad. The relationship is already damaged. The timing is wrong. Sun Tzu's advice for those moments is simple. Don't try to engineer a brilliant move out of a bad position. Secure what you need to keep going and get out. But the ground is only one source of information. People reveal just as much, usually without realizing it. Second, read behavior, not just words. People leak information constantly, through their physical state, their sudden changes in behavior, and the way a group starts to quietly shift around them. Signal 1. Physical state. Sun Tzu gives a list of battlefield signals you can read from a distance. things that were invisible to most soldiers but obvious to anyone trained to look. Dust rising high and thick means vehicles or heavy movement. Dust low and spread wide means people on foot. Birds suddenly taking flight from a patch of ground means something is hiding beneath them. Soldiers leaning on their weapons means they're exhausted or starving. The skill is simple. Pay attention to small details before they become obvious problems. Today, the signals look different, but the habit of reading them is identical. Someone who used to reply fast suddenly takes hours. They're pulling back. A colleague who always volunteered for projects stops putting their hand up. Something shifted. A person in a meeting who used to challenge ideas now just nods, either defeated or disengaged. Signal 2. Behavioral shifts. Think of someone who went cold after a conflict and suddenly starts being warm again. No conversation about what happened, no apology. Just friendliness, as if nothing occurred. That warmth isn't necessarily genuine. More often it's a test to see if the door is still open, or to get back access to something they lost. A real reconciliation comes with a real conversation. The same reading applies in a negotiation. Someone who resisted your terms for weeks and suddenly agrees isn't necessarily being generous. Either he's found a better option elsewhere and wants to close this out before walking away, or he's more desperate than he's letting on, and the quick agreement is relief disguised as confidence. Either way, the sudden shift in behavior is the actual information. The words are almost beside the point. Signal 3. Group dynamics. Sun Tzu says disturbance within a camp signals a weak general. When a group starts to fracture, it's visible long before anyone says anything out loud. Think of any group, a team at work, a friend group, a family. The signs are always the same. Side conversations that didn't exist before. Private group chats forming around specific complaints. People quietly skipping group plans without explanation. Someone who used to be vocal suddenly going silent. The group is telling you something is wrong, just not in words. By the time it becomes an open confrontation, it's been visible in exactly this form for months. The person responsible for holding the group together, who only finds out when someone finally says something out loud, was never actually paying attention. You've spent this chapter learning to read signals, in the environment, in people's behavior, in the way a group quietly shifts before anyone says a word. But there's one more signal worth reading, the one coming from your own side. Third, build trust before you enforce discipline. Every leader needs to build trust and discipline. Trust is the belief that you actually care about the people in front of you, that you show up, that you listen, that you invest in them before you demand anything from them. Discipline is the standard you hold, the accountability, the consequences when something falls short. Both are necessary, but most leaders get the order wrong or rely on one without the other. Think of a new manager walking into a team on day one. Some go straight to discipline, deadlines, accountability, consequences for mistakes, from the very first week. The team follows the rules, but only just enough to avoid trouble. No real investment, no real effort, just compliance, because nobody has any reason yet to believe this person actually cares about them. Others go straight to warmth. They show up consistently, learn what matters to their team, build real relationships, but they never hold anyone accountable. The team likes them, but they don't take the standards seriously. Comfort without performance. Neither works on its own, and the order matters. First earn the trust, then hold the line. The same person who would have pushed back on day one will hold themselves to a higher standard on day 90. Not because the rule changed, because now they don't want to let you down. Discipline introduced after trust reads as care. Discipline introduced before trust reads as control. The sequence isn't optional. Chapter 10. The 3 blind spots. Think of a team that loses badly. After the game, everyone says the same things. Bad luck, tough night, the other team just had a better day. But the loss was decided before any of that. In a choice the coach made, a misread of the opponent, a position the team was never in a condition to hold. Every breakup, missed opportunity, or collapsed plan that gets blamed on bad luck usually has the same real cause. Someone failed to read the situation clearly before committing to it. Sun Tzu says avoiding that requires 3 things. Know the ground you're standing on. Know your own limits. Know who you're actually dealing with. Get all 3 right, and you're prepared. Miss anyone, and the failure starts before you even realize you're in one. Before anything else, before you make a move, start a fight, or commit to a position, understand exactly where you are. Sun Tzu identifies 3 types of ground worth knowing. Each one requires a completely different response. Ground 1. The narrow pass. A narrow pass is a bottleneck. One way in, one way out. Whoever controls that single point controls everything that moves through it, regardless of how strong the other side is. Sun Tzu gives 3 rules for the narrow pass. If you get there first, hold it and wait. Your position does the work for you. In a negotiation, whoever sets the first number holds the narrow pass. Every counteroffer happens in relation to that number. Being second means fighting on ground the other person already chose. If you arrive second and they hold it weakly, go after it. You can still take it. Blockbuster dominated video rental for years. But by the early 2000s, they had stopped innovating, kept charging late fees nobody wanted to pay, and assumed they were untouchable. Netflix saw a company holding the pass weakly and went after it. By the time Blockbuster noticed, Netflix had already taken the position completely. If you arrive second and they hold it strongly, leave it alone. The cost of taking it will always be higher than anything you'd gain. Microsoft launched Bing in 2009 to challenge Google's dominance in search. Years later, Bing holds around 3% of the global search market. Google's position, built on years of user trust, data, and infrastructure, was simply too strong to dislodge no matter how much Microsoft spent trying. Ground 2. Entangling ground. Some positions are easy to leave and almost impossible to return to. See entangling ground as a moving train. You can step off whenever you want. Getting back on is a different problem entirely. It doesn't stop for you. Think of someone who quits a sport after 10 years. They figure they can always pick it back up. But when they try, the team has new dynamics, new relationships, new inside jokes they weren't part of. The skill gap is bigger than expected. The social position they held is gone. Staying loosely connected would have cost almost nothing. Coming back costs everything. The sport is just one example. Every group, every network, every community works the same way. You rarely know you've left for good until you try to come back. Ground 3. Open ground. Open ground is an empty field. No walls, no bottlenecks, no built-in advantage for anyone. The only thing that decides who wins is who gets there first. Most people lose open ground not to a better opponent, but to their own hesitation. The job application that opened on a Monday. The candidate who applied the same day got the interview. The one who waited until Friday to polish their cover letter got an automated rejection. The role was already filled. The startup that entered a new market 6 months before everyone else. Not because they were smarter, not because they had a better product, just because they moved while everyone else was still deciding whether the market was real. Open ground doesn't reward the most prepared, it rewards whoever stops waiting. Knowing what kind of ground you're on is the first piece. But Sun Tzu is clear. Most failures don't come from the terrain. They come from the person in charge. Second, know yourself. Sun Tzu identifies 6 patterns that cause leaders to defeat themselves before the fight even starts. Flight. You send people into a fight they were never prepared for, even when you knew the odds were against you. Insubordination. Your people are strong, but they've stopped listening to weak leadership. Collapse. Your leadership is strong, but the people can't execute what's being asked of them. Ruin. Frustrated people start acting on their own without checking if the fight is even winnable. Disorganization. There's no real discipline, so everyone does their own thing and nobody stays aligned. Rout. You walk into a fight that was never winnable because you never bothered to find out. Picture 6 versions of the same losing sports team. One gets blown out because the coach scheduled a game way above their level. One has talented players who've stopped listening to their coach entirely. One has a demanding coach running players who simply aren't good enough to execute the system. One has assistant coaches calling their own plays out of frustration, undermining the head coach mid-game. One has no real game plan at all, players running around with no idea what they're supposed to be doing. And one just walks into a much better opponent with false confidence, having never actually scouted who they were playing. Every single one of those losses gets described afterward as bad luck. But all 6 were decided before the game even started, by whoever was supposed to be leading. You can read the ground perfectly. You can know your own limits, and still lose, because you never understood the people you were leading or the people you were up against. Third, know the enemy. Once your decisions affect other people, 3 things separate good judgment from bad. Principle 1. Reality before obedience. Sun Tzu makes a bold claim. If the facts clearly say you'll win, fight, even if your leader orders you not to. If the facts clearly say you'll lose, refuse, even if your leader orders you to proceed. The person closest to the actual situation is expected to override the order when the order conflicts with reality. Think of a nurse who notices a patient's condition has changed since the prescription was written. The dosage that made sense yesterday is dangerous today. The doctor isn't in the room. The order is still on the chart. Following it quietly is the easier path. Calling the doctor at midnight is the harder one. But it's the only path that actually serves the patient. Authority deserves respect. It doesn't deserve obedience so complete that it overrides what the person on the ground can clearly see. Principle 2. Responsibility before ego. Sun Tzu's ideal leader does two things: takes the win without taking the credit, and accepts the loss without making it about their reputation. The only measure they use is whether the people they're responsible for are better off. Think of the friend who tells you something you don't want to hear, about a decision you're about to make, a person you're about to trust, a path you're about to commit to. They know you might push back. They say it anyway, because they'd rather absorb your frustration now than watch you deal with the consequences later. Most of the time, you don't even remember it as a turning point because the thing it prevented never happened. The damage was avoided before it was visible. That's the hardest kind of help to give, and the least likely to be recognized. The most valuable thing someone can do for you is protect you from a mistake you'll never know you almost made. Principle 3. Care without losing authority. The third principle is the hardest to recognize because it feels like a virtue. A leader can be genuinely warm, genuinely kind, genuinely invested in the people around them, and still fail. Not because they don't care, but because they're so reluctant to enforce anything that the people around them stop taking the standards seriously. Think of a manager everyone loves. The team genuinely likes him. He never pushes too hard, never creates conflict, always finds a reason to let things slide. The atmosphere is great. The results aren't. When a real deadline hits, nobody steps up. When a hard decision needs to be made, everyone looks around waiting for someone else to make it. The warmth was real, but it filled the space where accountability should have been. Care without discipline produces people who like you but don't perform for you. Discipline without care produces people who perform for you, but would leave the moment something better appeared. Both are required. Missing either one quietly destroys what you built. Real victory requires all three pieces stacked together, and missing even one of them, no matter how confident you feel about the other two, leaves you exposed in exactly the spot you didn't bother checking. This is what happened to the Roman general Varus and his 3 legions in the Teutoburg forest in Germany in 9 AD. He knew his army was the finest fighting force in the world. He trusted his local ally Arminius completely. What he never asked was what the terrain would do to them. The forest was narrow, waterlogged, impossible to navigate in formation. The legions couldn't form the disciplined ranks that made them unbeatable everywhere else. Arminius, who had been planning the ambush the entire time, was waiting. 3 entire legions were destroyed. Varus believed his army was the finest fighting force in the world, which wasn't true. He thought he knew his ally. He never once read the ground. He had none of the 3, he just didn't know it yet. Chapter 11. Understand how pressure changes people. Most people think character is fixed. A brave person stays brave. A weak person stays weak. A loyal team stays loyal. A divided group stays divided. Sun Tzu disagrees completely. He believes circumstances change people, and the type of pressure depends on the situation you're in. Put someone on familiar ground, and they get careless. Push them far from home, and they need support more than motivation. Trap them somewhere with no way out, and their fear turns into commitment. Throw rivals into the same danger, and they start moving like one body. So, before you judge how someone behaves, look at the situation they're standing in first. Sun Tzu builds this idea on a map of 9 kinds of ground. Each ground creates a different pressure, and each pressure calls for a completely different response. On your own territory, everyone feels safe. Too safe. So you avoid fighting altogether. Just past the border, you'll feel the urge to slow down and think it over. Don't. Keep moving and never stop. On ground where holding the position gives a decisive advantage, both sides race to get there first. Don't let them corner you. Stay mobile and keep your exits open. On flat, open ground where nothing gives either side an edge, don't let them surround you. Keep your options open and their escape route clear. At a hub connecting several routes, you're exposed if you're alone. So join forces with allies. Deep inside hostile territory, everything starts running out. Supplies, time, morale. So you focus on gathering what you need. On hard terrain, mountains, forests, marshes, exhaustion becomes the real enemy. So you keep moving no matter what. On narrow ground where retreat is difficult, force alone won't save you, so you rely on strategy instead. And on desperate ground, where the only way to survive is to fight, there's nothing left to protect by waiting. So you fight. You don't need to memorize all nine. What matters is the principle underneath them. The right move in one situation is often the exact wrong move in another. For example, on your own home ground, the priority is unity, everyone moving in the same direction, because a fractured team on familiar territory will still lose to a unified one, even with every natural advantage on its side. Deep in unfamiliar territory, the priority flips entirely toward cohesion and support, because the further you've pushed away from home, the more a single broken connection can bring everything down. Someone who moves to a completely new country for work is standing on this exact kind of ground, far from their normal support system. And the habits that worked perfectly back home, being a little distant with new people, assuming everyone shares your unspoken rules, become exactly the liabilities that sink the move if nobody adjusts for the new terrain. So far, you've seen how the ground you're standing on changes your own behavior. But Sun Tzu doesn't stop there. He also asks, if pressure changes people, how do you create that pressure in someone else on purpose? Here are two tools for doing exactly that. The first is about precision, finding exactly what actually matters to someone. The second is about timing, moving before they have time to react. Let's look at both. Start with precision. Don't try to beat someone on every single point. Find the one thing they care about most and focus there. Think about a divorce. Most people assume the fight is about the house, the money, who gets what. But often, the real thing someone cares about is much smaller. Maybe it's just having their kids every Christmas. The person who spots that detail early can settle the whole negotiation faster than someone still arguing over furniture. The second tool, timing. This one isn't about what you know, it's about how fast you move. Sun Tzu says speed changes everything because the other person can't prepare for something they didn't see coming. Imagine someone who's been thinking about quitting their job for months. If they hinted it for weeks, everyone around them has time to react, to argue, to talk them out of it. But if they just walk in one day and quit on the spot, nobody gets the chance to change their mind. The decision is already made before anyone can respond to it. Different tools, same goal. Change what someone does before they even realize it's happening. Those two tools were about pressuring someone else, but you can create that exact same pressure in yourself, on purpose, and one of the 9 grounds shows you how. That's desperate ground, the one situation with no way back. Here's what happens. Soldiers with no way to retreat lose their fear, not because they're braver, but because fear needs options to work with. So they fight harder, stay more united, and commit more fully than soldiers who know they can always fall back if things go wrong. Losing stops being something they can negotiate their way out of. There's a famous story that captures this perfectly. In 1519, the Spanish commander Hernán Cortés landed his army on the shores of Mexico. Once his men were on land, he quietly had his own ships destroyed, so none of them could ever sail back. He told his men the ships were too damaged to sail. With no ships left, his soldiers had exactly 2 options: conquer the land in front of them or die trying. And once that third option, retreat, was gone, every decision after that moment became sharper and faster. We're not talking about literally destroying a ship to make this work today. Think about someone moving to a new country. Booking only a one-way ticket is a small version of the same idea. There's no return flight waiting as a backup. They're removing the exit that would let them quietly give up the moment things get hard. You've seen how pressure can change your own behavior. Now let's see how the same pressure changes an entire group, even a group where people genuinely hate each other. Imagine a mythical snake called the Shuaijian. Strike its head, and the tail attacks you. Strike its tail, and the head attacks you. Strike the middle, and both ends come at you simultaneously. That's what a truly unified group looks like. Every part defends every other part automatically, with nobody needing to give an instruction in the moment. Now imagine that snake is a group of rivals, men from enemy states who hate each other under normal circumstances. Trap them together on a boat in a storm and they'll start helping each other instantly, not because they've made peace, because survival doesn't leave room for anything else. You see the same thing on national sports teams. Players who compete against each other all season as rivals for different clubs suddenly play as one team the moment they wear the same national jersey. The rivalry doesn't disappear. It just stops mattering because the danger is now shared. And us gets bigger to include the people you were competing against last week. So far, you've seen what pressure can do. You can create it in someone else using precision and timing. It can change your own behavior. It can even force an entire group into unity. But none of this happens by accident. Someone has to create that pressure at the right moment and protect it until it's done its work. That someone is the leader. He does it through two things: secrecy and timing. Pressure only works if people don't see it coming. Announce the desperate ground move too early, and people brace for it emotionally, which is exactly what weakens the effect before it even starts. Wait too long, and you lose the moment entirely. So the leader's real job is controlling exactly what people know and exactly when they know it. Here's how Sun Tzu describes it. A good general keeps his own people partly in the dark. He keeps varying his routes and movements so nobody, friend or enemy, can predict where he's headed next just by watching the pattern. And he shares the plan only at the last possible moment, so there's no time for it to leak. This isn't about distrust, it's about controlling information. But the deception here is only about timing, not about hurting anyone. Think about parents going through a separation. They often wait before telling their kids the details, not because the kids don't deserve to know, but because half-formed information usually creates more fear than a short wait once everything is settled. So that's the real argument of this chapter. Character was never fixed. It bends under pressure every time, in you, in other people, in entire groups. And a leader's job isn't to force people to be brave or loyal or united. It's to build the exact situation where bravery, loyalty, and unity become the only options left. Sometimes the only way to get yourself or anyone else to actually perform is to remove the exits. Chapter 12. Control your anger before it controls you. You're furious. Someone just embarrassed you in front of everyone. Every part of you wants to react right now. This chapter is about what to do in that exact moment, before you do something you can't take back. Sun Tzu uses fire to explain it. Burn the enemy's supplies, their camp, their troops, and you can destroy them in one strike. But fire is a strange weapon. Once you light it, you can't control it anymore. It can spread the wrong way. It can even turn back on you if the wind shifts or if you're standing in the wrong spot. Sun Tzu breaks all of this down into 3 moves. First, before you act, ask if this is really the right time. Second, once the fire starts, control your response. And third, control yourself. So before anyone lights anything, Sun Tzu asks 3 questions. Is this target actually worth burning? Is the weather right? And is the wind blowing in a direction that helps you, not one that turns the fire back on you? And even if all of that lines up, you're still not ready. Not without patience. Waiting for exactly the right moment instead of lighting it the second the urge shows up. The same is true for the things you do in anger. A message sent the second you're upset. A decision made on impulse. Once it's out, you can't take it back. Imagine a coworker takes credit for your idea in a meeting. You're furious. So you complain about it in the group chat the second you're back at your desk, typing out everything that's wrong with them while it's still fresh. It feels satisfying in the moment. But just like fire, it travels in directions you don't control. It can get back to them distorted. It can make mutual friends see you as the difficult one. It can resurface years later with none of the context that made it feel justified at the time. The tool itself was never the hard part. Waiting was. Before you light anything, it's worth asking which way the wind is actually blowing. So far, this has been about what to do before you light the fire. But Sun Tzu does not stop there. Because sometimes the fire is already burning. Someone says the thing, the argument starts, the message arrives, and in that moment, you do not have time to build a strategy from zero. So Sun Tzu gives you 2 rules for what happens next. First, know your response before the moment arrives. Second, choose the right level of force. The first rule is preparation. Sun Tzu lays out simple instructions for what to do once the fire starts. Push forward if the other side is in chaos. Hold back if they're calm. Press your advantage once things peak. Pull back if the situation turns against you. It reads like an emergency checklist because that's exactly what it is. And this matters because in the moment, you don't have time to think clearly. Think about a holiday dinner. You already know your mother is going to comment on your life choices, again. If you've thought about how you'll respond, a joke to deflect, a calm line to shut it down, a decision to just change the subject, you stay in control when it happens. If you haven't, your heart starts pounding. You say something you don't mean, and the whole table remembers it for years. The moment doesn't wait for you to figure it out. Whoever already decided reacts calmly. Whoever didn't is still catching up while the damage grows. That is the first rule. Know your response before the moment arrives. But there is a second rule. Even when you know how to respond, you still have to decide how much force the situation actually needs. He compares two tools. Fire destroys completely. Water just blocks. It can hold someone back without taking anything away from them. The same choice shows up in real conflict. Sometimes a friendship genuinely needs to end completely, but sometimes it only needs distance. Fewer invitations, shorter visits, keeping conversations light instead of deep. A lot of regret comes from choosing the wrong force, burning down something that only needed space or staying close to something that actually needed to end. So now you know the outer strategy. First, check the situation and ask if this is really the right time. Second, once the fire is burning, prepare your response and choose the right level of force. But none of that matters if the person making the decision is still controlled by anger. No ruler should send troops into battle just to satisfy his own anger. And it doesn't just apply to rulers. It applies to anyone whose bad mood can hurt the people around them, a parent, a partner, a friend. Picture someone who gets criticized in front of others. Humiliated, they fire off an irreversible decision on the spot. They end a friendship over text. They say something to a sibling they can never take back. They quit a job they actually needed just to feel like they're back in control. The decision feels powerful in that instant, but the damage rarely goes away even after the anger does. Here's the warning Sun Tzu closes on. Anger fades. It always turns back into calm eventually, but something you've destroyed doesn't rebuild itself just because your mood improved. The damage from an emotional decision is usually permanent. The emotion that caused it never was. This is why Sun Tzu keeps repeating the same idea throughout the book. Plan carefully. Move only when there's a real advantage, not just because a chance for revenge happened to show up. The most dangerous moment in anyone's life usually isn't a moment of weakness. It's a moment of anger that feels right then exactly like strength. Chapter 13. What you do not know can cost you. Sun Tzu says knowing what's actually true doesn't come from guessing or theory or intuition. It comes from people, more precisely from sources close enough to see what you can't see yourself. And refusing to find those people is dangerous. Because when you make decisions without reliable information, you're not the only one who pays for it. Everyone who trusted your judgment pays for it too. So this chapter has one goal: to show why strategy depends on the right information from the right people. It walks through two things. First, the 5 different kinds of sources Sun Tzu describes. Second, how to protect those sources, reward them, keep their trust, prevent leaks, and know who to ask. First, the 5 kinds of sources. If the truth comes from people, then Sun Tzu's next question is simple. What kind of information can different people give you? In his military language, these are spies. But for us, the word spy matters less than the function. Each one gives you access to a different kind of truth. He breaks them into 5 categories. Local spies are ordinary people who live somewhere. You talk to them once or whenever you need to, and they share what they already know. Inward spies are different. You recruit them, and they stay inside the organization, feeding you information over time. It's not a one-time trip, it's a standing position. Converted spies used to work for the other side. The key is betrayal. They weren't your person to begin with, you turned them. Doomed spies work differently from the others. You deliberately create false information and send it toward the enemy, built to be discovered and believed. The key is sacrifice. Whoever or whatever carries it is meant to be caught. Surviving spies are different from inward spies. You send them in for one mission, not a standing position. They observe, then come back. They go in, they observe, and they make it back out safely. Once they've told you what they saw, the job is complete. In modern life, you do not need to think of this as espionage. Think of them as different kinds of sources. A local source is someone who knows the environment from the inside. If you move to a new town, the person who has lived there for 20 years can tell you things no online search will show you. Which streets feel unsafe at night? Which property manager has a bad reputation? Which part of town looks nice but floods every winter? That is local knowledge. A surviving source is someone who goes, sees, and comes back. A friend visits a city you're thinking of moving to. They walk around, notice the atmosphere, talk to people, and tell you honestly what they saw. They are valuable because they have been there. They have seen something you could not see from a screen. Then there are inward sources. These are people already inside the system you need information about. Imagine you're negotiating a job offer. The recruiter gives you the official version, great culture, strong growth, exciting team, but someone already working there tells you the team has been understaffed for months, two people just quit, and the manager is difficult to work with. That person is an inward source. Not because they are doing anything dramatic, but because they are close enough to reality to tell you what the official version leaves out. Converted sources are different. They come from the other side, but their information starts working for you. During the Second World War, British counterintelligence captured German agents operating in Britain and turned many of them into double agents. The Germans still believed these agents were loyal, so the British used them to send false information back to German command. This is powerful because a converted source already has trust on the other side. Sun Tzu says this kind of source is the most important because it can help you understand the whole system. One reliable inside source can explain who matters, who can be trusted, where the weak points are, and how information actually moves. Lose that source, and you do not just lose one piece of information. You lose the key that helped you understand the whole picture. Finally, there are doomed sources. A doomed source is used to make the other side believe something false. A famous example is Operation Mincemeat, the Allied deception campaign before the 1943 invasion of Sicily. British intelligence took the body of a homeless man who died in London, gave him a fake identity as a Royal Marines officer named William Martin, and built a fictional life around him, letters, photos, even a fake fiancé. They released his body into the sea near Spain, carrying fabricated documents pointing to Greece and Sardinia as the real invasion targets. A Spanish official opened the documents, photographed them, and passed them to German intelligence. The deception worked. Germans moved entire divisions away from Sicily to reinforce Greece instead. When the real invasion hit Sicily in July, the island was defended by far fewer troops than it should have been. The logic is simple. Create information that's meant to be discovered, trusted, and acted on by the enemy. That is the point of Sun Tzu's 5 categories. Good strategy does not depend on one kind of information. It depends on knowing which kind of source you need, what that source can tell you, and how much trust that information deserves. Finding good sources isn't enough. You have to protect the ones you have. You have to take leaks seriously, and you have to know exactly who to ask in the first place. To protect them, Sun Tzu says that no one in the army should be treated with more trust than the people who bring you the truth. Because if people take a risk to tell you the truth and you punish them for it, they will stop telling you the truth. The same thing happens in everyday life. Think of a friend who finally tells you something honest but uncomfortable about yourself. If you mock them, expose them, or make them regret being honest, you teach them one lesson: telling you the truth is not safe. And once people learn that, the honest information around you quietly disappears. Then there's leaks. If important information is exposed, the damage isn't just one secret being revealed. The real damage is that people stop trusting you with anything important. A person who betrays a friend's confidence and treats it like a small mistake is showing everyone around them how little their discretion is worth. And people remember that. And the third piece? Knowing exactly who to ask. Because the person who seems in charge often isn't the person who actually decides. You see this in families all the time. The person who looks like the boss isn't always the one who decides. Sometimes it is the quiet aunt everyone calls first, or the cousin who says one thing and the argument is over, or the person nobody notices, but everyone listens to. Knowing who people actually listen to tells you everything. That is the discipline Sun Tzu is pointing to. Find the people who actually know, protect what they tell you, and never make them regret telling you the truth.